Are you saying that the Jubilee government is more fiscally irresponsible than a 24-year regime?
By far. What you did not have is borrowing 2 trillion shillings, which we cannot account for. You see, the trouble with the debt, if you recall, the only way that many of the African countries, low poor countries, that had gotten themselves into this sort of situation through the 70s and the early 80s were able to get out of it was through HIPIC, the debt forgiveness initiative. They couldn't have. Yeah, you can actually be weighed down and you can stagnate, and it was the recognition at the international level that these countries have got such huge debt overhang that they will actually never be able to get out of that situation
and become viable
unless you remove the debt. And sure enough, you remove the debt, and then there were a few other sort of fortunate thing happens. They restructured the economy, they started growing, but they forgot. So they are all now getting back into. We were not in the HIPIC. We have never been this financially irresponsible.
Ever?
Ever.
Not in Moi's 24 years?
Not in Moi's time, no. We have never been this fiscally irresponsible.
Again, to state the obvious, are you saying that the Jubilee government is more fiscally irresponsible than a 24-year regime that essentially was a one-party state where we lost quite a bit of our own public resources and we went through a very long and tough economic period? Long question.
By far. The Moi government did not run 8% of GDP deficit 5 years in a row. I'm saying spending 40% more than you're earning.
Yeah.
By and large, if you look at the Moi period, yeah, what you had was actually quite a complex situation. The only time that you had fairly severe financial indiscipline was in the period of the transition to multi-party. That was 1991, actually through to about end of 92, the golden bag phenomena and all of that.
Yeah.
It was compounded by an aid freeze, if you recall. So the freezing of aid, the multi-party transition, it was fairly short-lived. And then after, what it did is that it then forced, give the external actors, the IMF and others, a lot of leverage. So that while Moi government had managed to do its structural adjustment, so to speak, the liberalization in a fairly gradual and phased manner. That episode shifted the leverage. And after the election, remember, then Moi was desperate because there was a macroeconomic instability. And he was forced to do a big bang, a liberalization. It was very short, very painful, very intense, but it was probably a good thing. Because after that, you're done with it, and the economy moved on. In fact, the economy recovered quite quickly. But for that, the economy would probably have imploded 4 or 5 years down the road. But that big bang, liberalization, salvaged the economy, because the way they had been done it now, the corruption had made it. So, but again, the nature of the indiscipline was monetary, really. It was more monetary than fiscal. Okay, it was monetary shenanigans with golden bag, foreign exchange, Kamlesh Patni, if you remember all those things. What you did not have is borrowing 2 trillion shillings, which we cannot account for.
Okay.
That is unprecedented.
I remember growing up during that period. I remember how painful it was for our parents and for some of our relatives who essentially it was a very difficult period. The loss of opportunity, the collapse of banks, that sort of thing. we have our median age is 19.1 years old. What does it look like for a 19-year-old today for possibly the next 10, 15 years?
It depends. What having a strong market economy does is with the proper sort of monetary and macroeconomic management, not having these sort of excesses, is give it resilience. It has shock absorbers. It is able to absorb shocks. Okay? What you have done is undermine that resilience. Okay? So that the economy is now very vulnerable to lots of shocks. For instance, right now you see global interest rates are rising. If you look at most of the money in the if you look at you had, for instance, the other day, the governor say, you know, we have a huge amount of foreign reserves, which is true, $8 billion. But where is that reserve? What kind of money is it? Quite a lot of that money, probably 1/3 or more, is what you call hot money, short-term capital. Turkey had a lot of it 3 to 4 weeks ago. Now there's none left. You know, it's
and in a few
in a few short weeks. So you are much more. So the difference between us and Ethiopia is because Ethiopia had exchange controls. Then when you have exchange controls, you don't have these market adjustment mechanisms. So you run out of foreign exchange. And that's why they have that crunch. When you have a flexible exchange rate, and now you try to control interest rates, if you have an interest rates, they sort of adjust. But it exposes you to these sort of emerging market shocks and capital flight and things like that. That's one thing. So vulnerability increases. And when that, then but the fiscal, the fact that you have to bring down this budget deficit, okay, because now you've hit your capacity to finance the same level of government expenditure by borrowing is hit a brick wall. You cannot increase borrowing without, again, causing instability. So that process of adjustment means that you're trying to raise revenue and rein in expenditure. Now, you're taking money out of the economy, both of those. The revenue, you're taking money out of the economy, and the expenditure, you're taking money out of the economy, and you're expecting that economy to yield more revenue. So you've got a very nasty dilemma there, which is the problem Greece has been struggling with. So you are now exposing yourself to other risks. And one of the risks you're exposing yourself is one where this then depresses the economy, that feeds to businesses. Businesses cannot pay loans, it feeds into your banking system. Then you also, all sorts of things which are increasing your, what you call financial or economic fragility. You're becoming a very fragile economy. You also become preoccupied with this crisis management. Once you become preoccupied with crisis management and you're a fragile economy, and potential investors can see that, you create investor uncertainty, you're doing many other things like these corruption things which are also destabilizing the economic and political situation. So what does that mean? It means that you are not going to be able to focus on the questions of how to create opportunity for these young people. And what we're looking at is then something which had in the 80s, which was called the lost decade. Yeah, because that was the situation that led to the 80s being called the lost decade, because you're just preoccupied with crisis management. Yeah, you're preoccupied with crisis management, and of course, as the crisis and unfolds, you're feeling the political pressure from the people, and therefore you find the governments being tempted to make even more mistakes. So time passes. Now you are hostage to fate. Because it's a question of, if these young people don't have opportunity, what are they going to do?
Because the question is, if they are lost, where are they?
Yeah, where are they? So that is something which will be looming large, because you're adding more and more of them. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that you can take the bull by the horns, take some very radical decisions, which fundamentally sort of confront the challenge. There's some financial restructuring that need to happen. There's some fundamental economic restructuring that need to happen. But that our leadership is so conflicted, both politically and economically, in terms of the economic interests, that you probably would require new political leadership to do.
Yeah, because that was actually going to be my next question. Yeah. Do these guys have the mettle, on both sides of the aisle? Does anybody in the political constellation that we have the mettle to do that?
I know them well. I haven't seen it.